So there's three things you need to know. And I got this from a gentleman I had on my podcast named David Meltzer, who grew a $100 million company, then lost it all, and then grew it back again. So he said there's three ways to learn. There's coaching, teaching, and mentoring. So before you ask the question, how do you find a coach? You need to know if you should be coached, right? And I think a lot of people are not ready to be coached. And I wasn't for years. My coach was on my podcast 3 times. I knew him for 5 years before I started working with him. It took that long, but he knew, right? Like he knew how long it was going to take. Like he knew that every 6 months he would call me, and one of those times I'd be like, let's go, right? And that was just last year. I thought coaches were just like, they just take your money, right? But I didn't realize there's coaching, teaching, and mentoring. What I had my whole life, what everybody starts in life with is teachers. It might be your parents. Maybe you don't have a good relationship with your parents. Then maybe it's your teachers or your coaches, right? Then you have your coaches. Your coaches are coaching you, but that's like in sports. It's not in life, right? So, and then you have your mentors, which is like your grandfather or maybe your neighbor who's really good at business or whatever, right? And so I think that determining that first, what do I actually need? Okay, so my neighbor's my mentor. He's been mentoring me for 10 years indirectly. I do need to get from $10,000 a month to $20,000. I'm just stuck here at 10,000 if I were to really think about it. And maybe a coach can help me do that. Let me explore it. So until you actually start to think like this, you're not going to even hire.
It is time for Build That Podcast, where we will discuss how you can use a podcast to grow your business and expand your influence. I'm your host, Eric Rutherford. Let me encourage you to sign up for the 200 words to move you forward with marketing and podcasting, delivered right to your inbox each Tuesday. Sign up for it at buildthatpodcast.com/the 200. I'll also put it in the show notes. Now, let's jump into today's episode. Man, I'm excited today because I have with me Ryan Sullivan. He is founder of Podcast Principles, whose goal is to help people launch top 1% podcasts with zero paid promotion, using a proven launch strategy tailored specifically to turn audience members into podcast fans. He's also host of the Bopcast podcast, which showcases outliers who are breaking the mold regardless of the status quo. And just as a final PS, he is also a longtime rapper and DJ. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Intro was amazing. You didn't have to do that. Thank you so much, man. Really appreciate it. I'm happy to be here. You're a podcast guy, so we could talk shop all day. So I'm just excited to see what we get into today. And let's do it, man. I'm ready to flow.
Yeah, me too. It's always fun having conversations like this with people in the podcast space. That's what they do. We can take all kinds of tangents. But first, man, before we get into podcasting and podcast principles, how does this DJing experience prepare you for launching a podcast consultancy? Because I find that fascinating.
Yeah, I appreciate actually, nobody's ever asked that question. And that's why when I was looking over the notes, I was like, this is a good one, because I don't even truly know the answer to it, right? Like, it's hard for me. Now I have to go back, right, to like think, which is good, which is the best podcast questions, right? Make your guests think. That's what you want to do. So if I were to look at it, so I'll give you the context first, right? I won't go 10 minutes on this, just a couple seconds here. So in high school, I was on the soccer team with a friend. One of my friends on the soccer team is my business partner now, ironically enough. But another kid, he was 16, so he couldn't drive. So he went to me and he was like, hey, I know you've like made music or done stuff with music before. You know, I was into like DJing at home, but not in front of people. And he said, can you drive the car, because you have a license, and you be the MC, and I'm going to do the music, and we'll start a DJ company together. And this was when I was 17, he was 16 or 15. He would have his mom drop him off around the corner for the meetings so they didn't know that he didn't drive, that he wasn't old enough to drive. So he was getting the deals. I was MCing. He was DJing. A lot of times it was a disaster, you know, which you could probably assume, doing Sweet 16, doing quinceañeras and not knowing Spanish. I mean, it's, you name it, we destroyed it. But we also had some good gigs. So that was my start to DJing. And I think what that did was allowed me to kind of understand people a little bit better and understand that you can control a crowd. They will listen to you. if you say the right things, right? And that is a perfect way to get into podcasting. There's no better way to get into podcasting than performing or being in front of people. Now, when you're podcasting, in some ways, it's actually more difficult. And it's more difficult because I only see Eric, I don't see you. I don't see you watching and listening. You're seeing me, but I can't see you. When I'm in front of a crowd of people, I see everybody, right? So I think that's a great way to get started. And I think that's really my tie-in to podcasting. And I think it just gave me a little bit more confidence to go in and start my own podcast, which was really the first thing that I did in the space.
No, and I appreciate that. It is when you're standing up in front of a group of people and you can engage the crowd, measure the crowd, you're getting whatever vibe the crowd has. It could be good, it could be bad. You're trying to bring them in because they may be, out in space and wherever. But that is, I never thought about that, but that is great experience because I've presented, I've been a teacher, I've done all kinds of stuff, and it really is about drawing people in with your voice and engagement.
Yeah.
So I think that's brilliant in terms of a connection. I would have never thought of that.
I just have to think about it right now for me to come, it's just like, yeah. And I'll just add one last thing to that. My girlfriend's actually a kindergarten teacher. My girlfriend's a technology teacher actually now. So she has 1,500 students, right? She works between two different schools. And what I explained to her is she's just doing what I'm doing. Like what I do in front of a crowd, she's doing with kids. And it's funny that she has kids. I have adults. Sometimes the adults act like kids. Mostly the kids don't act like adults, but if I don't care if it's a group of 5-year-old kids, you're going to learn something about people if you get in front of people, for sure.
You do. It is fascinating from conversations to things you just pick up on, from body language to everything. And you do apply that here because especially, via video, I'm sure even more in person. I know you said you have done a lot of in-person recording. You can really pick up on things. And so it's fascinating just having this conversation, but also knowing this is being recorded. It's going out to an audience who's in their cars, who are taking a walk, who are walking the dog, all that kind of stuff. So it's fascinating how it works. So then that leads into podcasting, right? And so you're founder of Podcast Principles. So what is Podcast Principles? What's your business look like? And what kind of problems do you solve for people?
Yeah. So how I explain it now is we're wedding planners, but for your podcast. So we basically take you in and we go, hey, are we going to do the bouquet toss? Is there going to be slow dances after the intros, right? Like that, but for your podcast. So who's the ideal listener? How many episodes do we want to have before we release? What is the intro looking like? What tone are we going for? What vibe are we going for with the branding? Does it match our brand directly or is it more indirectly tied to our business, right? So it's basically, to put it in reality here, it's a one-on-one podcast onboarding program. And I don't do group coaching, at least right now. It's all one-on-one. It's all custom. So that's been really what's the most popular thing, I would say, like where we get the most testimonials. Basically, everybody makes some kind of video testimonial after they go through this program. And so what I try to do is I just adapt to what the market needs. Like our first client for this, he just wanted help launching his podcast, right? So myself and my partner came up with this idea of this kind of 5-call program. And that's now that's our bread and butter. And we've been doing it for 3 or 4 years now. And then the other side of the business, which is not really another side, but just another aspect, is the production side. So we have a production company, we have a production team, production manager, et cetera. So we also produce shows. So that's not all of our clients. I think most people go with our design package, which is just the calls and the intro and the outro and the design. And really just to design the show, that would probably be for people who are like solopreneurs or solo business owners. And then we also have those larger packages though for kind of larger companies too.
No, that makes so much sense. And that phrase, because I saw that on your LinkedIn and I absolutely wanted to make sure if you didn't mention it, I wanted to mention it. We're wedding planners, but for your podcast. Like I can't think of a more vivid description like that just sets in the mind of
4 years, Eric. It took me 4 years to come up with that, man. That literally, I made that on a LinkedIn comment, dude. So I appreciate, and you're in the game, so you understand it. It has been my day-to-day job to try to figure out how to talk about this stuff and put it into people's minds. And I'm a wedding planner. I'm a wedding DJ. So I help people plan and DJ and MC and put their weddings together. So I'm doing that too. I know how to I'm a pro at that too. So it's like, not to say I'm a pro at the podcast game, I'm learning, but it really is that. Like I see and just to add context here, like my boss for the DJ company I work for, they have intense training. Like I've gone through a ton of training. They have a very detailed onboarding program for their clients. We do that, but for podcasts, it's literally the same thing.
Wow. Again, I think it's just brilliant because it's, and I think of a wedding planner, it is all the pieces, parts to be able to get to the final delivery of the wedding and the after and everything. And there are so many pieces in podcasting, and
it's actually kind of similar. Like you can almost match a lot of the pieces together. And Eric, you've been to a wedding where they didn't have a wedding planner, and you've been to a wedding where they did. One of them was in a backyard. The other one was in a venue. One of them had your cousin DJing. The other one had a professional. So we don't have to work with us. You don't have to work with Eric. You don't have to work with anybody. But your results will be different.
It's true. It really is. And there is a lot of process. There is a lot of flow to that. Now, it sounds like do you work with a lot of solopreneurs, individual content creators? Do you work with businesses? Who's your your primary customers?
Yeah, I'd say my primary customer is probably the solopreneur, like small online business. So probably an online business with high profit margin. I'm not working with like the mom and pop like mechanic shop down the street. I'm working with solopreneurs who have their business figured out, most likely 6 figures plus, because that's the type of money you're going to have to make to kind of invest in something like this. And I'll be honest with you, I haven't niched down. So to answer that question, it's not like here's the persona we serve and that's it. Our system kind of works if you have the right mindset and you have the right scenario for you or your business. I sent out a $35,000 proposal to a company that's probably going to be worth $100 million this year. And then I also have worked with solopreneurs who haven't even started their business yet. So maybe that's a little bit on me to kind of, this year really thinking through that and maybe niching a little further. But we have successfully worked with these kind of different sectors. So I'm like, all right, hey, like once I want to niche down, I'll do it. But I think this is probably the last year of really kind of testing and kind of seeing what the market, what the market's like.
No, that makes sense. And that's the hard part too, because you can always say, hey, I'm going to try and work with this customer, but then you get in there and it's like, maybe it's not the right fit. Or the more you learn, you're more like, hey, I can actually reach this customer too. Because I'm kind of in the same boat. I'm kind of like, looking at businesses and do you look for enterprise? Do you look for startups? Do you look for solopreneurs? And it's sort of like figuring out what that can be and what works best for you, your system, and everything else. So I think just having that ongoing conversation is huge.
Well, podcasting is almost niche enough, I think, right? I think that the medium is niche enough. So it's like everybody in their life is, I don't know what the stats are. More than 50% of people will probably have a wedding, right? But probably not even 1% of 1% will ever have a podcast. So you can almost niche to the category, So, I mean, at least that's my excuse.
No, but it really is. I mean, a lot of it on the setup, really, it comes down to the strategy and preparation on the front end, and then, just the production on the back end. It's putting the systems in place, and whether you're like you say, $100 million business or a $1 million business, there are a lot of it's pretty similar in terms of what you do. Now, obviously, the 100 million, you've got a little more resources. You can do a few different things, but yeah, it's pretty similar. So I get that. Totally get that. You also talk about this holistic approach to podcasting. How would you describe that? Because I like that phrasing and the way you're doing it.
Yeah, I think I would, and I'm making up this definition of holistic, so it's not.
That's half the fun.
As much as I'm obsessed with health and wellness, and I've been on a few podcasts talking about that, which you don't want me to start talking about that, but the way that I look at holistic with this, it's kind of how I look at my life a little bit. Like I really just want to, like, my goal with my podcast, for instance, is to just interview outliers, right? People who are just breaking the mold and doing what they want to do unapologetically. And I want everybody to live like that, or as many people as possible. So I think with podcasting, the holistic means, like, I want it to be organic for you. So I want it to feel right for you. Whereas you may have a marketing company that might say, hey, this is the podcast we have to do, and it's going to bring $6 billion ARR, and we got to meet all these metrics. And that's great. But what if the person hosting it hates it? Okay. So now, like, you're putting somebody in a position, almost like forcing them into that position. So I think the holistic could be a lot of things, but I think it's basically like, I want to be the first person to tell you that a podcast is not right for you, because I want you to live the life that you're supposed to live, right? Like, if you're a great writer, shit, I mean, you might just go write a blog, like, I'm not going to try to shove a podcast down your throat. So
now, I think that's an important distinction too, because knowing whether you should or whether you shouldn't, I mean, that's a key question, because not everybody should do a podcast. Not everybody will enjoy it, because there's a lot of work involved. And especially if you don't like this part of it, like the conversation part, you definitely don't want to do one. If this is not your, if this is not your sweet spot or what you enjoy, I mean, you can sort of outsource just about everything else, but not this, right? This part right here where we're chatting. So yeah, it's huge.
I can't build your personality for you. I can't. I can't make you like podcasting. And those are things that I think a lot of people, and you probably experienced this too, a lot of people that come in, they love the idea of it. And so I have to start breaking down the idea into reality, which is hard, right? So that's a hard thing for people to grasp, because they've thought that for the last 6 months, year, 5 years, have seen this one person, this one podcaster that they love, and they didn't see any of the bullshit that they went through, right? So they only think it's that. They just think it's them on a podcast and there's 100,000 views and everything's sunshine and rainbows. So I have to start breaking it down and start asking the questions. And like you almost alluded to there, once you start asking the questions of, okay, I have my pen and paper. Who is going to record the episodes? Okay, you. Who's going to edit it? You. Who's going to promote it? You. Who's going to produce it? You. Who's going to manage it? You. Who's going to hire the freelancers? You. It's like, wait, you for everything, And so a lot of people don't think through that reality.
It is. And then there's the whole preparation for every, then it's like, you're doing interview, or you're doing solo content, you're doing sort of a talking head. Okay, now you got to prep for every episode. You got to get guests, and you have to go through, all of that as well. So yeah, there's so many moving pieces that most people don't understand. And it's like, oh, wow. Yeah. And then once you get into it, you realize how much, like, you might even be able to schedule that out on the front end. But like, once you're in it and you're well on your way, you're like, this is kind of work intensive.
Oh yeah. And then you're on fire. It's like, you're basically like, oh, whoa. Like, my guest, that was one of my posts the other day. I was like, your guest flaked and your producer won't answer. Now what? That's going to happen within the first 3 weeks. So it's like, now what? Right. And now, I don't know, you were probably like this too. You know what I know how to do? Everything. I can do everything. I can edit video. I can edit audio. I can do copy. I can do design. I can make a website. I can do, like, I can literally do, I'm not an expert in these, but I can do everything that I might at some point need to be able to do, not only in my podcast, but also in my business. So it's like, if you're not, then that's where people stop, actually, is they throw in the towel because one thing didn't work. It's like, everything's not going to work. It's like, that's good. That's great.
I was literally editing a podcast, because my goal has been to, is to begin outsourcing and doing a lot of that as I add customers and do things like that. But yeah, so I'm editing and I'm getting ready to post an episode, and I do one last listen through, just to make sure my volumes are right. And I realize they are, like, mine's really loud and theirs are just really quiet. And it's one of those pull your hair out moments. It's like, okay, so I'm going to go back and re-edit. And, it's like, okay, I've got to go back and tweak. And oh yeah. So there is not one week that goes by where something just goes smoothly.
That's the game. And we try, right? And as podcast coaches and people that help, listen, I'm going to try to, my goal is to get anybody to, the outcome with as little amount of friction as possible. There's going to be work, but the friction is what I'm trying to avoid. So you can do everything you want. Why have I interviewed 50 editors and not 6? Because I know I have to interview 50 to get 2 good ones, right? It's like,
it really is. And I like how you talk about that. You're trying to reduce the friction, but you can limit the work a little bit, but really it's the friction part, and trying to just avoid as many potholes as you can ahead of time, because you're going to have them, but you can try and limit what that looks like for your podcast and for your business as much as possible. So yeah, I appreciate that distinction. As you talk to businesses or solopreneurs, what kind of fears do they have about podcasts? Like, it's like, hey, I think this might be a good idea, but I'm really kind of nervous, or, I'm a little uneasy about this. How do you walk them through that?
Yeah, that's tough for sure. I think everybody has different fears. So, like most of the time I do try to get to them. But a lot of times, like, they know and I just don't know, so I don't know unless they tell me, like, explicitly, which is not everybody. Most of the time, it's not most of the time. A lot of times, it's something deep. Like, it's literally like somebody's uncle or like their mom on Facebook or their Facebook friend or their friends from high school are going to judge them because they got 10 views or something like that, something like kind of arbitrary. So I think it's these kind of like made up things, but I'll say this, right? I think there's a few different types of people. I think there's a type of person who releases content, who makes content on the internet, has gotten some few hate comments, has made some posts that got 0 likes for years, like who has just been a consistent content creator. That person kind of gets that the podcast is going to get no downloads for a while. They kind of get that it's not going to bring them results for a little while. And then I think there's kind of the person who I was speaking about before to an extent, which is really that person who like sees a podcaster and thinks that could be them, and it could be, but it's not. If you don't have what they have, even if you had everything that they had, you're still not them. So, I mean, in terms of wrapping it back up to the fear, I think a fear is first of all, like I said, is nobody going to see this? I think that's one. So that's more of like the visual side, like I would say more of a vanity fear. That's like, if nobody sees it, that's good. Good thing nobody saw the thing that you posted that sucked. That's good. Like, it's like your stuff probably isn't that good if nobody sees it, which is fine. Now you could get better. I think this is what people don't understand. I've interviewed a lot of artists that have millions and millions of plays, right? And downloads and stuff, and it performed and opened for people and sold out shows, whether it's artists, comedians. I've talked to all these people. If you think there's pressure when you have 0 views, imagine how much pressure there is when your last episode got 1 million downloads. That's real pressure. So whatever pressure that you're making up is made up, right? And so, Kanye is a bad example, but anybody, Kendrick Lamar, I mean, you name it, rapper, artist, whoever you want to name, they still have to go make the next song and the next album, right? So it's like, at the end of the day, if you're caught up on starting, it's made up. It's definitely made up. You probably haven't even tried.
Now, that's a good point too, because I think sometimes it really is this idea. It's of just putting yourself out there. I think that's part of it too, is because when you're on a podcast, it's a different medium, especially if you're doing interviews. You are putting yourself out there. Now you're on social media. If you're not used to being on social media, if you're not used to posting, it's a huge mind shift of I'm now out there.
That's it. That I was going to say, like, that's exactly how I explain this to people. If the second that I join this call and Eric hits record, I'm not Ryan from Podcast Principles. I'm not a rapper. I'm not a DJ. I'm none of those things. I'm talent now. Like, I am the talent. I'm an actor on the show. I don't own the show. The show's not about me. I'm just an actor. I'm just on this show, and you give me my lines and I read them. There's no lines. There's no scripts here. But I look at it, the second I sit down to produce that audio, you realizing that the audio is not good is because you're an audio engineer in that scenario. So you have to think, what would an audio engineer do, right? people think that they're a guest on a podcast and it's about them, but the audience doesn't care about you because they don't know you. So how could they care? So you instead look at it like, I'm the talent. I need to bring something to this that shows cases some skill or some talent or something entertaining, because you're in a medium of entertainment. So it's that, like you said, you mentioned it, mindset shift. It's mindset shift for all of this stuff, everything.
And that's a really good point too. It's even if you're doing educational content, there is a level of entertainment. It has to be engaging, or people are going to just turn it off, not finish the episode. There has to be something that keeps them moving, that they're at least like, I'm enjoying this while I'm learning. Otherwise, it's like reading an instruction book, and that's just or a PowerPoint deck, or whatever it is. So I think sometimes too we forget that there is that entertainment aspect of it too.
At least the good ones have it, I would say.
That's a good point. Yeah, the good ones, they're engaging. They really are. There's some endearment. There's some laughter.
Yeah, exactly. In one way or another, it doesn't matter how you do it. I don't care. Like if like, this is what I tell people every day. If you want to know how to make a great podcast that draws people attention, go watch all of the podcasts that are made by comedians, because comedians are the best entertainers in the world. Aside from Mariah Carey and Beyonce and singers, comedians are the best entertainers in the world. So just look how they do it. They're bringing in clowns. They bringing in, like, they have massive production crews. They have like all of this and this and that. You don't need all that, but the idea applies, right? Like, they are not satisfied with it just being simple,
It's true. And being able to interject a little bit of humor, a little bit of laughter, and just learning that skill set to go along with it. Some people have it more naturally, others not so, but it really is an entertainment function. I appreciate you bringing that up. We talked about, the challenges of managing a podcast, like all the pieces, parts. So how do episodes, if somebody has a podcast, what's the difference between, say, episode 101 to 105 from episode 1 to 5 in terms of like preparation, production, distribution? Because the first 5 are very different than like once you crest 100 and so forth. What, how do they, what's different there?
Yeah, I'll just tell you what I see. So how I look at all of this is, like, I don't tell you what works. I tell you what works for me and my clients. So if somebody comes and says, Ryan, that's not true, I would say, you're probably right. Like, it's probably true for me. It's probably not true for you. But yeah, so I'll say off the bat, I don't put too much stock in the first 5 in terms of it being amazing. Like, it's not my goal. My goal is for you to build the habit, because this is such a habitual medium. We're spending 5 to 10 hours on to build the show. You best bet we're talking about the first 5, and we're doing everything we can. But let's look at our expectations. Did we expect to get 1 million downloads in episode 1 through 5? No. Okay, that's way different than if we expected to get 1 million downloads on episodes 1 through 5. So the answer depends on the goal. But now I'll wrap it into what I see, right? So what I see is, I'm working with podcasters who are at episode 100. I'm at episode 126. So I kind of know what's going on there. What they say is basically like, I want to grow is the number one thing. They don't know how to grow. They don't know how far they want to grow. They don't know why. They don't even know. They just say, hey, I want to grow. I'm like, how many downloads do you have? They're like, this many. I'm like, all right, that's not enough. They're like, no. And then I ask how much enough is, and then they don't know. So they don't even have a goal. Like, they haven't even put an address in the GPS. They're just driving, right? So I think that's a lot of what I see at episode 100, episode 100 to 105. But I would say is kind of that complacency and just being like, I want to change, but I don't know what to change. I know my audience is there, but should I try something different? Those questions kind of come up. In terms of the preparation of those episodes, like say episode 1 versus episode 100, at 100, you kind of got your system dialed in. So I'm going to assume that you have a baseline, a base set of listeners, people that kind of return every week, whether that's maybe fluctuates more on YouTube, but it's pretty steady on audio. That's typically what we see. You're pumping out your social media, so you probably got some kind of plan dialed in. And then your preparation for episodes is going to depend on the show, right? Solo, interview, whatever, live show. going to depend, but I just think you're probably going to have a lot more confidence. And I would think that would allow you to try more things. So on episode 1 through 5, you're so worried about just doing it that you can't even see yourself at an expanded view. On episode 100, you're like, this is my podcast. This is who I am. I have an elevator pitch. It's memorized. Like you're just more comfortable. So I think that lends itself, and hey, that comfortability though also lends itself to just not trying anything new. So yeah, I don't know. I think they're so wildly different, and it does depend, because that's the golden answer in podcasting is it depends, which I try not to use, but that's what I would say. My roundabout answer to that one.
No, I love it too, but it depends. I like how though you talked about like episode 1 through 5, you're just trying to survive, right? You're just trying to create the thing, and everything's weird and everything feels foreign. And it's like you're trying to write with the other hand. And so by 100, you at least have the flow, but then it's at 100, it's okay. What's my next step? Because you're in the habit, you're moving forward, but it's like, okay, how do I grow? And I think you raised a really good question. It's like, what is it that you're chasing? Is it downloads? Is it sales leads? Is it, attribution? What is it you're chasing at that point in time? Because if you don't, as you say, if you don't know a number, if you don't have a goal, the world's wide open. You don't know which direction to go.
Yeah, you don't have to either. Like even with my podcast, I'm like, I know how many YouTube subscribers I want, but it's like, I do like just doing it. So, but I'm not, if I say to you, Eric, my podcast, man, I don't care how many downloads it gets, I don't care how many views it gets. If I say that, then that has to be true though. Then I can't go to the next guy and complain that I have nothing or that I don't have enough. Right. So I know where I'm at, but I'm not mad. I'm not angry. I'm not emotional. I just, this is where I am and I'm totally cool with it. And so I think they're like, what they want doesn't even match what they say. So it's like, okay, let's figure this out. And they have a problem with that, and that's where the lack of kind of goals comes from. And you said it beautifully. That's exactly how I put it. Right. What I say is, what do you want this to do for you? Now we can figure this out. Like the podcast is a car. Do you want to build an off-road vehicle? You want to build a supercar that goes 200 miles an hour? We can do anything you want, but it can't do 7 things great, right? So you got to determine that.
Yeah, and it's something else you mentioned that I think is really true is understanding, the first handful of episodes, you're just not going to get that many people listen to those when you launch it. You just aren't. And it just takes time. But what I always find fascinating is when you start looking backward, you get to episode 30, you get to episode 50, you get to episode 70, and like people go back and listen to those early ones even then, right? Even some of the ones you don't really want them to listen to, they still go back and they get some downloads. And so it's one of those fascinating things. Once you get far enough down the road, you really do get this funnel effect.
Oh, it's amazing.
But you have to get far enough down the road.
Exactly. You got to do it long enough. I mean, it's like literally podcasting is like anything. This is why I love my business. This is why I love my job, because it's like anything. I'm not working out to get in shape. I'm working out to stay in shape. Right? I'm not podcasting to have a podcast. I'm podcasting to keep podcasting. That's why I'm doing it. Right? So it's like, yeah, dude, we all know the people who did, who got jacked and then they were fat the next year, it's like, that's cool. But you did a one-time thing. Like, that's not what I'm about. That's not the podcast that I launched. I mean, I've done it, and I can make it work for you, but it's like, if you want to do it in seasons, great. That's a different story. But it's just, yeah, I'm really here for I'm doing it for 10 years. I'm in for 10 years. That's what I committed to. I'm not saying I'm going to have an interview every week. I don't. I do solos. I repurpose. I'll take this interview, maybe put it on my podcast for my audience. It's stuff like that. I'm not. I do, I have a standard for myself that I hit. But I'm in it for 10 years personally, and I'm 5 years in now. But I've been on and off in that 5. I've been consistent for the last 100 weeks or 80 weeks or something like that. But
that's a significant number right there. I mean, if you can, that's like year and a half, year and 3 quarters. but still even, a longer goal. You mentioned repurposing, and I think, man, I've interviewed some people talking about repurposing. I personally think, repurposing, there's so much value there. If businesses or solopreneurs, content creators, if they can only repurpose their podcast in one other way, how would you suggest? So maybe they're like, I have limited resources, I have limited time, I can repurpose it one way. What would you recommend and why?
Yeah, I would say, once again, like it's going to depend, right? So it's going to depend on what you want to do. So if you are already getting leads from TikTok, we might just repurpose the podcast for TikTok clips because you're already getting leads. Like, you see what I'm saying? So like it does matter like what you want to do. Once again, I'll tell you what I like. I love clips. I love clips. I'll give you an example. I have an in-person podcast. The podcast has 500 or 600 followers on Instagram, like not my personal account, but the podcast itself, the page that I have. I think 5 to 10 of those clips have 20, 30, 40, 50,000, 60,000 views. And those clips, not only do they get a lot of people to see them comparatively, they also live on my guests' Instagram accounts too, right? So anytime somebody goes there, they see my podcast. And then also the inquiries that I've gotten since releasing highly edited, highly produced podcast clips, like I'm talking to people that were dream guests where I'm literally in conversations with their agents and stuff, right? So the clips for me have given me the optics. And I think also the video version, right? Like I'd say both, but the video version is part of the podcast. That's not repurposing. That's just part of the show. But for me personally, the video version and combined with the clips have given me my podcast a perception, a much larger perception. And I have like 10,000 audio downloads. Like I don't have 1 million downloads, and they don't care because they look at the visual components and they see that that's professional, and they're willing to work with me. So for me, that's what I've done. But I run a podcast company, so it all makes sense. My clips have to be good, so there's that. But that's what I would do. Now, if you have a scenario with a company, like if somebody's like, here's my company, here's my budget, here's my time, this is who we're targeting, this is how many followers we have right now, then I'll give you the strategy for you.
No, that's an excellent point. It's where you're at. If you're on TikTok and you've got engagement, that's where you go. Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, you pick that source. I've really going on video as well. And that's something for a long time. It wasn't that I was anti-video, but I wasn't pro video, so to speak. And so what I've learned in the last few months is, okay, I have to really up my video game. And so that's part of my process right now, is like, it's a work in progress. But we're beginning to say, how can I improve the video so that it is that calling card, it is that reference point, and it can draw people in for that. That's something else I've learned, and I appreciate you talking about that in some ways earlier. That maintaining, you podcast to maintain podcasting, and I think that's the thing is like, by the time the maintenance of it, once you get to episode 70, episode 100, episode 150, they're just better because you've done it more. And so you really have to work through the bad episodes to get to the good ones. At least that's my experience. I don't know if you've seen that with people or not, or if that's been your experience.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, and I relate it to fitness again. It's like, I know, since I've been working out for 8 years, like I know what pushing it for me is, and I know what not pushing it for me. My not pushing it workout is somebody's hell. I know that. It just depends where they're at. And somebody else's not pushing it for them is my hell. So it's the same thing with podcasting. But yeah, man, I've been through it. Like, I just don't think that, I don't personally subscribe to, I wouldn't take podcasting advice from somebody who only gives advice and doesn't actually have one. Like, I think I just pride myself on that. That's my personal thing. Nobody else has to abide by that. I don't think the Ferrari mechanic needs to own a Ferrari, right? And I used to be a mechanic, so I know a little bit about that. And so with podcasting and being in the shit and having the tough interviews, like, yeah, man, you don't get better at interviewing from you don't get better at basketball from dunking. You get better at basketball from people stealing the ball from you. So, like, for real, man, like, once you know how to dunk, you know how to dunk, right? I'm 5'8", pretty tough for me. Can't really do that, but with podcasting, it's the same. Like, I don't get, like, the layup interviews for me are magical, like magical. Like, that's why I podcast, literally, dude. It's because I love moments of just being tapped in with somebody. I know something's coming out of them. That's why I do it. I don't care about any of the other stuff. And so, yeah, I mean, I think in that case, the opposite side of that is the very difficult interviews where you're dragging the interview along, where you're talking, where you're like, wow, this is tough. I've done those when I could have cut it off at 35 minutes. I went 2 hours because I just wanted to keep going and just see what would happen. Yeah, I think you need the lumps, man. I think you need the lumps. I think you need the lumps. And yeah, I think you need to see that big guy in the gym and be like, hey, okay, like there's levels to this, you know?
Yeah, and that's a good point. Yeah, not every interview goes smoothly. Some of them are harder than others. But yeah, you do have to it's the reps. It really is. You know, you talk about working out. I started running last January, so I've been at it. I don't know how many months is that? Anyway, not quite a year and a half. And like what I'm doing now was a fairy tale fantasy a year ago. But I couldn't get there if I didn't go out and tie the shoes on and hit the pavement every day.
Perfect.
And so it really is. And so I think for everybody listening, yeah, the first ones, they're just going to be clunky. They just are, but you will definitely improve. And like we've been saying, the great thing is your listenership at the beginning is going to be low, but that means you get to work out the bugs. It's not that you mail it in, but you just have to go in with the expectation of it's just going to take some time. But man, once you get the funnel going, once you get the endurance built up, that's when the really cool stuff happens. Both in like the interview and then with the business functionality as well. It sounds like that's been some of your experience too, is after, once the journey's underway, that's when the cool stuff happens.
Yeah, that's true. 100%. I mean, like, yeah, I mean, I didn't even know the value of my own podcast. People were telling me, people came up to me and they're like, you're an amazing interviewer. You're like Ed Milet and you're like these other guys. And I'm like, all right, like I just make podcasts, dude. I kind of just because so sometimes you need a little help. And I think, and we didn't touch on this, but it's been so important in my life that I have to, is coaching. I mean, and getting some kind of coaching in your life. For me, my fitness coach is like basically a pro bodybuilder. I don't sit there and do workouts with him. He just sends me my workouts. But just having that person, like I said, like that person that's like at that high level, to give me advice, that is great. And then I have an accountability coach who's kind of like a life and business coach combined. His name's Nick Gates. Jack Singleton is my fitness coach, and then Nick Gates, he's my kind of life and business coach. And so he keeps me accountable, and he showed me, he was like, yeah, you actually have you have so much more potential with this podcast. If that's what you want your dream project to be, like the thing that you work on, not for money, that you just want to build, then let's do it. But he's like, then let's actually do it. Like, let's actually set these goals to get 10,000 subs on YouTube or whatever. Let's not just keep doing it to do it. Right. And so I wouldn't have changed my goals if I didn't get help from these people. So I think that's where podcast coaching comes in. And that's where what we do comes in, which is, essentially just having that outside perspective and somebody to push you to set those goals. That's the only other piece of this equation that I would include. And it brings it right back to the beginning. You could tell the podcasts that had planners that helped them and the podcasts that didn't.
It's true. I know when I first got started into podcasting back in 2020, I worked with a guy, he did all my stuff. He did my production and editing at the beginning on a podcast I ran for a couple of years. And then he helped me set it up and figure out all the pieces. And I would have been lost, so unbelievably lost without him. And I call him every now and then just to chat and, ask questions. And that got me started. And then I started learning on my own. But then, I'm reaching out to a lot of other people and asking, so what about this? What about that? Just from a learning perspective. But I like what you're talking about, that goal accountability perspective is important, because sometimes you just get into the motion and you forget you need to be going somewhere and you need to have these goals, and how do you get there? So I like that coaching aspect. I'm glad you brought that up. How do you go about finding a coach? I know you're one, so obviously call you first, but if they can't reach, how do people think about that? What do they need to think about that in terms of finding a coach?
So there's three things you need to know. And I got this from a gentleman I had on my podcast named David Meltzer, who grew a $100 million company, then lost it all, and then grew it back again. And so he's a great entrepreneur to know. He was just on my podcast as well. Been a fan of him for years, David Meltzer, if you want to Google him. So he said there's three ways to learn. There's coaching, teaching, and mentoring. So before you ask the question, how do you find a coach? You need to know if you should be coached, right? So I think a lot of people, if you're ready, right? I think a lot of people are not ready to be coached. And I wasn't for years. My coach was on my podcast 3 times. I knew him for 5 years before I started working with him. It took that long, but he knew, right? Like he knew how long it was going to take. Like he knew that every 6 months he would call me, and one of those times I'd be like, let's go, right? And that was just last year. So I didn't believe in it at all. Like I thought coaches were just like, they just take your money, right? But I didn't realize there's coaching, teaching, and mentoring. What I had my whole life, what everybody starts in life with is teachers. It might be your parents. Maybe you don't have a good relationship with your parents. Then maybe it's your teachers or your coaches, right? Then you have your coaches. Your coaches are coaching you, but that's like in sports. It's not in life, right? So, and then you have your mentors, which is like your grandfather or maybe your neighbor who's really good at business or whatever, right? And so I think that determining that first, what do I actually need? Okay, so my neighbor's my mentor. He's been mentoring me for 10 years indirectly. Maybe there's, maybe I do need to get from $10,000 a month to $20,000. I'm just stuck here at 10,000 if I were to really think about it. And maybe a coach can help me do that. Let me explore it. So until you actually start to think like this, you're not going to even hire one, because you're going to think it's bullshit, because you're going to see how much money it costs. So it's funny. People will buy a $40,000 car like 3 or 4 times in their life, but you tell them the coaching is 10 grand and that 10 grand is going to help them make $1 million, and it's too expensive, right? It's just, I get it because I'm that person.
I am right there with you. And I've gotten some coaching at times, and it has been incredibly helpful. And I like how you talked about even, that idea of, okay, how can I get from point A to point B? How can I get from 10,000 in revenue to 20,000 in revenue? Okay. If I can find a coach that helps me do that, be able to take the shortcut, because you're not having to learn it on your own. You're basically getting somebody to walk you through how to do it. And that's significant. Right? If you can spend some money to get your return, get it back quickly, it's like, okay, that's a shortcut that's absolutely worth taking.
If you ask people, most people have no idea what they want. No idea. Like if you get specific, they don't know what they want. So if you don't know what you want, like start answering those questions first. Then once you're in with the coach, they can just lock in with you because they know what you want. So, and I'll just put that practically, right? Like say with my music, like I said, I've been releasing music for like 8 years. The thing is, I didn't know what I wanted. Did I want to go on a world tour? Did I want to sell out a show? Did I want to have an album that charts? Did I want to get signed by a label? I don't know. I never decided. Why do you think my career didn't go anywhere? So it's like, I didn't decide. Now in business, I said, I want to make $5,000 a month. Look what happened. I make $5,000 a month, right? Like, it's like, that's just how it goes.
Yeah, and that's important to have some concrete goals, to have those concrete measuring sticks so that hey, either I'm going in the right direction, I'm not going in the right direction, or what do I need to do to make that next step? And that's in business, that's in life, that's with podcasting, and I think that's something else that as businesses, if you're thinking about a podcast or you already have a podcast, kind of thinking, what is the goal? Right? What is the goal? Now, if you're a business, I got to believe somewhere in that goal is I need to somehow make money. just for, I'm thinking from a business perspective, it's like, if I'm a solopreneur, I got to pay my own bills. If I've got a business that employs other people, okay, I got to pay their bills and my bills. So one of the things I love about podcasting is the idea of that you can get sales leads from your podcast. And so for businesses, whether they're solopreneurs or larger businesses, what's something that they can do to create leads from their podcast that they might not even be aware of? So this isn't like ad money or sponsorship money. This is like, how can I get a lead for my business, for my podcast in a way that I never even thought of?
Yeah. So I think, and I don't do this, like I don't have a podcast that gets leads this way, but this is one example, right? I think I said this on another podcast a while back. My friend Darren Lees, we were talking about this. He's a podcaster too, and helps people start podcasts. And I said to him, so you could have a podcast with 10 downloads. Okay. And you could have 10 viewers on your whole podcast. You could have one episode. I mean, it's probably not going to happen like this. If 3 of those people book a call with you, okay, and then 2 of them become clients, if you spent $5,000 on the podcast that year, but those 2 people that listened to the podcast booked a call and became clients, if those 2 clients make you $20,000, the podcast basically helped make $15,000. So that's how I look at the sales. Like I look at a podcast and I say, what do you want to do? And they say, hey, Ryan, like I totally understand the branding side. I totally understand helping people. I totally understand just putting out my voice. But I'm in a situation where I really want my media to just make me money. And I really just want a podcast to bring me deals because I like talking to people, but I'm very upfront with the fact that I want it to bring me deals. I think a lot of people don't say that. I think they want the branding side, but they don't want to actually tell you until 6 months later and they're in the hole that they did want it to bring them money. Because deep down inside, they do want it to bring them money, but they think that's like too selfish. It's not too selfish. To say your goals up front is never too selfish. That's a good way. That's a good thing, right? So you can have a podcast with 10 downloads. If 2 of the guests become clients, if 2 of the listeners become like, it just depends how your business is framed. Now, let's go to the other side. Say we have an e-commerce business, right? And this business sells products that are $7.99. You're not going to interview your customers. You're never going to make that money back by interviewing people you want to buy your $8 product. Maybe the podcast then is more of a branding play. Maybe it's more of to get our clips, to get our social media up so that we get hundreds of thousands of followers, right? Like both those podcasts work and make you money, quote unquote, but they're 2 different things. So, I don't even really know much about the affiliate side, the sponsor side. I'll just leave you with this on this question is I've been working on a sponsor for the past like 2 years. And they're a supplement company. And I want them more than they want me. Like I want to be the sponsor of their product more than they need sponsors. So I have LinkedIn message because use my LinkedIn clout a little bit. I can get into I can connect with some higher level people using that. So I've messaged all their like half of their C-suite, and I'm just like any of the marketing C-suite, and I'm like, hey man, this is what I do. I need to be your sponsor. And they all, like half of them replied to me, and now they know I exist, right? And so I'll do my follow-ups and I'll get in there. That's how I look at this stuff. I'm like, I want the company that I want because I love that company, not for the money, not for that. So, but yeah, there's so many ways to skin a cat here. Like the worst thing that you can do is have a podcast that's not doing anything for you. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like that's when you're definitely going to quit. If it's doing something, then we can optimize that something. If you got one sale, would you say my business is a failure? Or would you say, I guess I could get 2 now? That's kind of how I look at podcasting.
I appreciate that distinction. It's like, it's not necessarily the number of downloads. It's what happens with the downloads. And I like how you say, sometimes you just need to state it not only out loud to yourself, but on the podcast. It's like, look, here's what I do. If you have questions, call me. Let's set up a call. Yep. Shoot me a DM. Let's have this conversation because you don't get if you don't ask, right? And so now you mentioned also this idea of interviewing, the difference between somebody who has an $8 product and somebody who has a much larger product, and the idea of interviewing customers. Would you elaborate a little bit more on that as far as interviewing? Like, do you encourage businesses to go out and say interview customers or interview competitors, or how does that work in terms of generating leads? Does that question make sense?
Yeah. So an easy way to look at this, I think, is just a company that, like, if you have like almost maybe like more like account-based marketing style, where you are kind of like, or a long buying period, that's going to, is probably not the right word, but that's where maybe an interview show is going to make sense for your company. Like, if it takes you 18 months to close a deal, podcast is kind of nice, because the podcast where it moves slow too. So what you can do is, say you have company A. Okay. So company A is releasing LinkedIn content, just bloop, bloop every day, just a drip of LinkedIn content. Company B is also releasing LinkedIn content, bloop, just another post, another post. They both do the same thing. But company B has a podcast. Company A and B are fighting for the same customer, right? They have a similar product, maybe a few differences, right? Personality wise. But company B goes, I'm going to interview, because I have this podcast, I'm just going to interview the founder of this company. That founder might not even be the decision maker. It could be the founder, could be the janitor, could be the marketing department, could be the sales guys. I'm just going to interview some people at this company, or maybe one person, and I'm going to showcase them and highlight them and make an episode out of that. Company B now has 1 hour total, because of a 1 hour interview, maybe a 30-minute prep call too, has an extra 1 hour and 30 minutes that company A never got with that company. So relationships are based on time, right? So for the most part, like based on a lot of other things too, right? But a lot of it's time, because now you're comfortable with me. Eric was way more comfortable with me 50 minutes in than he was 5. We were pretty good 5 minutes in too, but it's just time. So I look at it like that, man. Like, sure, that company A's personality might be better, but they might just go with you because, you had them on the podcast, you spent some time with them.
I think that's fabulous, because it's building relationships. It's that reciprocity thing, right? So you have them on the show, you're like, look, I'm just going to showcase you. I just want to hear about you. You tell me about what's going on in your business and everything there. And it's like, it gives them a sort of a megaphone, and you get sort of the co-branded while you're on there. So you get the benefit of the co-brand and the relationship. Act like
you're already working with them, because you are. You are already working with them. There's just no money yet. So and people don't think about that. Company B, though, now has more pressure, because company A didn't even have a chance to ruin the relationship. Company B, dude, the second you jump into the water, you got to know how to swim. So it's like, if you just have your rinky-dink interview show of, all right, Jeff, tell me what do you do? They know that too. You can ruin the relationship as fast as you can build it, right? It takes 20 years to build your reputation, 20 minutes to ruin it. So also keep that in mind. Your shit better be dialed if you're going to do that.
It's a good point. Yeah, it can build a relationship. It can tear it down. It's a great opportunity to really do both, either way. But you're right. It does give you that in being able to build some relationships and be able to talk to people you might not be able to talk to otherwise. I always find that fascinating, right? Like, I can't get an email answer from some people I know, but you know what? They'll join me for a podcast. I can have a conversation. It's just, I love that about podcasting. I don't know if you've experienced that or not, but man, I think that's just one of the untold riches of it.
Yeah. Oh, easily. Yeah. I mean, there's just that for me, it's the podcast coupled with LinkedIn. There's almost nobody I can't at least get an email that's seen or acknowledged, and it's easier. It's harder than some people think, and easier than what other people think, so it takes a lot to get to that point, but once you're there, it's actually not, it's actually easy now for me to email 100 NBA players to be on my podcast and just work one of them for the next 5 years to eventually get, that's the reality. Like, I could just do that. Nobody's stopping me.
No, it is. It's a process. It's a way you can, it really is it can provide open doors that you don't think possible, and maybe not even aware of. Let's just kind of, as we wrap up here, one takeaway for people. If you're, if that maybe they are businesses who are thinking about starting a podcast, maybe they're a business who's well underway with their podcast, I'll kind of leave it open-ended. Any takeaways that you would like to leave for them?
We're now in the age where you can find the media that fits you and your company. So I think you got to use that to your advantage, because I think a lot of these companies are saying, they say to me, should we start a podcast? And the question should be, what should we do? Like, what media fits us? Right? So if you're a graphic design company, you might want to just keep making designs. It's like, you might not need a podcast. It's all good. Like, you're good. Just do what you do best, So, but I like that. And this goes with what my mission for life. Like I said, like, I want people to find their voice. I want people to realize that they can leave their job, that they can do their side hustle, that they can be an artist. It's the same thing. You can do anything you want, right? In reality, to an extent. But you also, on the same hand, you want it to fit you, and you want it to fit what is right for you. And now with the internet, business has completely changed. Like, I would probably either be a car salesman, I don't know what, probably a car salesman if I wasn't, or maybe a mechanic, but I probably wouldn't have went to sales. If the internet didn't exist, now we have it. Now your business can mostly live online, even if it's an in-person business. Your customers are online. Their face is stuck to their phone all day. So in that case, you can find, it might be audio, it might be blog, it might be a 3-minute podcast, it might be a 40-minute podcast, it might be just posting on LinkedIn, maybe not a podcast yet. It might be just being a guest on a podcast for 2 years and using that content that content becomes your podcast. So it's just the dynamics, the variability of it is, I think, what I want to leave people on, which is you can find it for you. Just don't feel like whatever somebody else does is the thing that you should do. It's 90% of the time it's not.
Now, that's a good point. Find what is best for you and what fits best for you. So if our listeners want to know more about you, more about your business, how to find you, where do you want them to go?
Yeah, so my LinkedIn, I'm active on there. So if you do use LinkedIn on a weekly basis or daily, I'm there. I post every single day. So that's where I make a lot of my content. So that's LinkedIn.in/SULLYBOP. So if you're watching on the video version, it's right behind me, SULLYBOP. Or you can Google Podcast Principles. Our website will come up. It'll be up in about 2 weeks. By the time this comes out, it might probably be done. So that's there too. But yeah, Podcast Principles or Sullybop, SULLYBOP. And you can just Google those and we'll come up. So make sure to connect with me, message me. I try to be very accessible. So if I am working, I'm normally pretty accessible. So email, LinkedIn, you name it.
Sweet. So if you're listening, I'm going to put those links in the show notes for you to check out. Ryan, I've enjoyed your content on LinkedIn. That's how I connected with you. And so I knew, man, this is a guy who knows what he's doing. I want to make sure that other people know about him. So Ryan, thanks for joining me today. This has been a blast.
Eric, this has been so much fun, man. Thank you for having me. Love talking podcasts. Love chopping it up about this stuff. It's my favorite. So happy to do it again anytime. And shout out to the listeners as well. And shout out to you, man, building the show up. And
awesome.
Just keep doing it. Just keep making content.
It's good stuff, man. It is good stuff. Make sure to sign up for the 200 at buildthatpodcast.com/the 200 and receive 200 words every Tuesday to move you forward with marketing and podcasting, delivered right to your inbox. Lastly, if you have questions or comments, you can find me on LinkedIn at Eric Rutherford, DM me on Twitter at rfordej, or email me at eric@straightforwardmg.com. Remember, use podcasts to grow your business and expand your influence.